But what I did, what you did cover, and I was, this was, and I think it's probably going to end up being my favorite part of the book is the chapter on laundering a massacre from Black Wall Street to Black capitalism, and because you start off with all of our favorites. I mean, you have all of these great examples of it, oddly, like I don't know if this, of black women sort of on TV and in film leading the way to explain to us the accuracy and the reality of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Black Wall Street. And you and your crew have been, for me at least, among the leaders in reminding us of the actual history of Black Wall Street. So, in particular, I wanted you to just talk about that chapter, but specifically the role media have been playing, and that you all point to have been playing in shaping our concepts of what that history is and is not.
Yeah, I mean, I always have to credit you for that because you're the one that challenged us to do that episode, and that uncovered more than I ever thought it would. I mean, like I had always felt that something was missing from that story, but I had never really looked as deeply into it. Um, I will say the book is broken down in three sections, so you get, and it's broken down into the sections of actual the process of laundering. So it's like there's a layering section, part one, part two, or excuse me, part one is placement, part two is layering, part three is integration. So the book goes like broad theory. Let's get that's the placement. All right, now the layering is let's look at the kind of like broad like historical timeline of things and like within the international context in the United States, and then integration is like okay, let's look at like case studies of what we're talking about. So like that's how you get the one on Black Wall Street, and then the other one on the Dylan Roof, and him traveling around before he went to kill everyone at the church. Um, so with the chapter on laundering a massacre, I originally wrote an essay for Hood Communists years ago. I most of that didn't make it here, but it still gave me a nice skeleton to start with. And then also there's just all that research that came from the podcast that we did. So Tulsa, Oklahoma, for those who don't know anything about this or maybe never seen that episode or haven't read the book, there was a massacre in 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma, that people often reference Black Wall Street as being the thing that was burned down, and 300 people were killed, primarily Black people, by a bunch of white vigilantes. That's just like that's the popular story, and so usually that is told to us that there was this Black town or this Black utopia, that was in Greenwood. In some cases, I don't know, y'all have heard of it. In some cases, it almost has been told to me that Greenwood was almost a different place and Tulsa was somewhere down the street, as opposed to Greenwood just being a neighborhood in Tulsa. Like Greenwood was the nether city. There's different folklore out there depending on what barbershop you go to, you know. So it's just like, um, so Black Wall Street is this huge business district. Again, this is the myth that these white people got jealous about and then burned to the ground. That's and so even before we get to debunking the myth, part of why we think about it that way isn't just because we hear it around the way. It's media, and Rod Stewart really did the work of reading through a lot of the books on Black Wall Street, and most of them are horrible. They don't really have any. They don't really offer any new information. A lot of them are self-published. A lot of them are just kind of regurgitating the same narrative they've heard. They don't have any primary sources. It's not a story that's really studied very well, to be quite honest. And so what we get is this retelling of the story, and like Russell calls it, almost a fantasy of this place where Black people owned everything, and Black people ran the entire community, and we were self-sustaining and self-sufficient, and nobody bothered us. And then these white people came and they took it all from us, and it was our Wakanda. And that's another media analogy, like it's a Wakanda, right? So all of that's kind of the set the backdrop, but then the story itself is just that's just not how it went down. One, like Black Wall Street, no knock on the people of that time, they didn't call it Black Wall Street. That's a posthumous term. Um, uh, Booker T. Washington was heard by someone else. No one has him on record calling it Negro Wall Street, and even that is hard to verify if you really look it up. So it wasn't even called that. It was a neighborhood that about 35 blocks of black people lived in, and then a small component of that was a black business district that was tolerated by the broader Tulsa community. Tulsa was a oil city, so a lot of the money was made through mining oil, and black people worked in the service industry within that broader oil industry because they weren't allowed to work in the industry because of segregation. So right there, you're already confronted with how do you have a utopia where you're not even allowed to work around the main resource that creates the wealth in the area? Like you already have run into a major problem as far as like the consistency of this story. So most black people that lived during that time were not rich business owners. Most of the people worked or lived in substandard housing, and most of the people, were poor. 95% of them worked in substandard housing. This is from the Tulsa, Oklahoma report on the massacre in 2001. They note this. It's in there. I don't know if anyone ever reads it, but it's in there. Um, and a lot of those bad properties were actually owned by the few black people who did have businesses. Those properties didn't have plumbing and things of that nature. They were slumlords in many ways. Some of them own up to 10 to 20 properties themselves. So that's the context. The reason there was a black business district is because what black people were not allowed to spend anywhere else. So they had to, they had to stay here. It wasn't because we had all this money. And so again, if someone has the power to say you can't go anywhere else, that's not a utopia. That's a colony. Like that's just what it like. You can only leave to work and then you got to come back. That's literally a colony. Like, and then you take the money you work that you get from the white people that you're working, because again, most of them work for white folks. They didn't work for these black businesses, and you come back and you spend a little bit with us. And so there was going to be a contradiction that creates a black business class, right? So the day of the massacre itself, the massacre did not happen. There's no evidence that really shows, for the most part, other than maybe a few references here and there, that the massacre was led primarily by some kind of jealousy or something. It was black resistance that really caused the white folks to lose their minds on that day. So Dick Rowland was the brother that was a 19-year-old brother, was working at he was shoe shining for white folks. Again, he was not allowed to use the bathroom where he worked. Again, this utopia thing just keeps falling apart. So he had to go across the street to a colored restroom because he could not use the bathroom in his own building. And he gets on a elevator to go, and he's going up. And that's where this white girl, and her name is Sarah Page. Back then people had to man elevators, so you couldn't just press a button. And there's allegedly a scream. No one really knows what their relationship was. And next thing you know, in the newspaper, it's Negro nabs a white woman, and white people want to originally lynch him, Dick Rowland. There's no proof that he did anything to her. So he's at the downtown jail. White people assemble there. And the cops are actually a few of the cops that man the jail are trying to like keep the white folks from like storming the jail and taking him out and lynching him. Black men who are veterans of World War I go downtown to offer support to fight against this white mob. And they come down. When they come down the second time to offer support, a shooting and a fight breaks out. A few people get shot, and then they get chased out to Greenwood by all these crazy white folks. And they're literally like handing out, like police are handing out badges to white folks. And the phrase was "grab a gun and grab a nigger." That's and they're handing out badges and guns to these folks. They run to the neighborhood. Originally, the black people staved them off. And then that next morning, they surround Greenwood. They said there was a whistle that blows, and then they just bum rush the entire neighborhood. And that's the story that we end up getting in in what was some of the movies we referenced, The Watchmen, or that was just not the movie, the TV show, The Watchmen.
And then The Equalizer, because that was my reference to the black women that I was attempting to pour a joke with, because you got Regina King in The Watchmen, and then you got Jada Pinkett Smith, you got my girl, talk about laundering black rage, Queen Latifah. you know, from Black Fists to FBI agents or whatever she is in Revlon commercial. But you know, so yeah. That's really what I meant. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
But yeah. So you get the Watchmen, you get that, you get but I guess what we also try to chronicle, and this wasn't in my original essay, was while that story was that story and it's being laundered, there's also there's been this rise of interest in Black wealth and trying to understand it after the financial crisis of 2008. And there's been various books, some good, some horrible, to try to understand it. And then there's also been a rise of a conversation on reparations, for better or worse, depending on who represents that conversation. And then there's been a kind of low key, I don't call it a movement, but at least a renaissance or a push for like buying Black. And all these factors converge together, and like Black Wall Street becomes like the capstone to sell all that shit to us. Like Black Wall Street is like it is the quintessential marketing tool to pushing all of the other rhetoric of Black wealth and Black capitalism, and even the watered down understanding of reparations, because they'll say, well, all this wealth was burned. And actually there wasn't a lot of wealth burned because most of those people didn't have any wealth. You know, so you see Biden adapting a program on saying we want to rebuild Black Wall Street. You know, you see United Bank coming out with programs about there's a Black owned bank calling your checking account, which a checking account doesn't even accrue interest, but calling your checking account the Black Wall Street checking account. You know, like all this different and then you know, Killer Mike and mainly Chase Bank and Jesse Williams come up with the Greenwood app. I mean, I couldn't even reference everything. There's obviously the Tulsa was it the Tulsa Fund or Tulsa something fund?
The Tulsa, the Tulsa, oh damn, yeah, the Tulsa Fund, the Tulsa something fund.
And that he got accused of fraud. I don't know, you know, that's still to be worked out, I guess. And then so you have this convergence of all this, and then at the same time, and this is what we were saying at the beginning, like now it's buy Black. And so we know in Google Trends that buy Black had never been searched more than it had been searched in 2020, right after George Floyd was killed. Like it had never been searched more. And you found in areas, when you look at the trends in areas like Atlanta and DC, you know, so you gotta take that for what it is. Like for some of the highest. Black Wall Street had never been searched more than it was in 20 and 21 on Google. And then some other stuff I found, like Black businesses had been on Yelp, Black business searches went up 2,400% in 2020, 2,400%. And then reviews for Black businesses went up 232%. Just to give people some numbers, like this isn't stuff we're just making up. So this really there was a material thing where people really did push. There was a major push to that. LeBron makes a documentary about Black Wall Street, or about Tulsa and Black Wall Street. Like Westbrook made a documentary about Black Wall Street. These are basketball players. You know, again, Killer Mike got a bank.
What's his name on the Celtics?
People writing.
A man on the Celtics just said something about it recently. Forgot his
name.
Jaylen
Brown.
He said something. Yeah, I think that was him. He was talking about.
Yeah, it was him that he wants to create the next Black Wall Street. Yeah.
Real quick, I know we're running out of time. I just wanted to one part from that chapter. I just want to highlight, and then I'll turn it back over. Because you all do, I think, some very important in juxtaposing what we don't hear about from the Elaine, Arkansas, right? I went blank. Elaine, Arkansas massacre that happened before this. And then what you wrote here, I think encapsulates what you just were wrapping up with there. How we remember and what we choose to emphasize from historical memory is layered with the interests of the Black elite. So your point about how the narrative around Tulsa has been turned into something that supports the Black elite is, to me, well, I'll have to use this one for now.
Now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
We'll recreate as we get there.
I was just about to say, he's been searching for that. He was searching for it.
We'll get it back.
Yeah, I can speak to that real quick. I can speak to that real quick because I don't run out of time. But yeah, there was again, people can read the book, but the Arkansas the Elaine massacre was a labor struggle. Again, I won't get into the long details of it, but that was a labor struggle where more people died than, and not just more people died like numerically, but proportionally. There's a much smaller area, Elaine, Arkansas, much smaller area that happened 2 years prior to 1919 during the Red Summer and all of that. And that was a labor struggle where Black people were accused of being communists and working with the socialists. And the New York Times put out propaganda about this. And some white folks rolled up on these Black people meeting. They were sharecroppers to get more money from the people they were working for. They threw shit through their window and they got into a whole battle, and they massacred over 237 people in a weekend. Some numbers as high as 845 people. But because that wasn't a struggle for this kind of utopia of Black capitalism and Black wealth, that story doesn't get remembered in the same way. And there are countless other stories that do not get the same significance because they don't serve the kind of agenda that people want to push. So you're not going to see they don't have a bunch of labor leaders out here. So you're not going to see people, for all the flaws of labor as we know, you're not going to see that becoming the capstone project. So like we know, like Black Wall Street is the city on the hill for the Black elite, because it is a fitting example to sell all the other things. It perfectly fits this narrative. It has a certain type of like, oh, they took this from us, so we got to get it back. So it gets that kind of, it gives you that. It also pushes a weird Americanism too, right? Like, you got Biden talking about we're a country that recognizes our flaws and all this. So it's also like Black people never had a fair shot at capitalism. We need to give them a fair shot at capitalism, and Black people burned and died and were lynched for their Americanness. We built this country, that kind of vibe, right? Like it fits all the popular phrases. Like, so it's very important to a lot of different interests within the Black elite, not even just one, like a lot of different types of interests. It perfectly encapsulates it.
Saturday with Renee.